excited. I'm on the big battleship, the USS UFC, and I'm ready for war, baby. I'm looking for a fight.
Let it be a comeback of a fighter, a singer, a team, or even a comeback in a conversation. They are all so satisfying. Then imagine how much interest for the fans the UFC fighters' comebacks hold. They just add that essential spice to the show. By the way, please do like, share, and subscribe, and also hit the bell icon so that you never miss your dose of entertainment. Well, let's dive into today's topic. Top 8 greatest comebacks in MMA.
Just a nice knee to the body there by Travis.
Alistair with a short right there.
Alistair's plodding forward. He's hurt! That's right when we were saying it. He can't just...
Number 8. Travis Browne vs. Alistair Overeem, UFC Fight Night 26. After an upset loss to Antonio Silva, Alistair Overeem was looking to bounce back at UFC Fight Night 26 by taking out rising contender Travis Browne. And early on, it looked like he'd make good on that plan. Giving up some height to Browne, Overeem managed to close the distance and attacked Browne with a series of knees to the body that had the Hawaiian doubled over in agony. Overeem followed with a barrage of punches and more knees, and it looked for a second like the fight was about to be stopped. Perhaps it should have been, in fact, but the referee let it continue, and somehow Browne crawled out of danger and got back to his feet. And suddenly, Overeem was the one on the defensive, sucking wind as he'd seemingly unloaded everything he had already. And so, despite still being rattled, Browne went on the offensive. He fired a front kick to the body of Overeem, and a second one glanced off the Dutchman's jaw. A third kick landed flush, and suddenly Overeem was down. And where Browne was able to recover, the Reem simply wasn't. And the Hawaiian had completed an improbable comeback from the verge of being stopped.
Friend is about as primal as this sport gets. You were way behind in this fight. You stopped him, and watch as you walk away. I mean, that is about as intense as it gets. How good does this feel?
Number 7. Darren Elkins vs. Mirsad Bektic. One of the very best at taking a beating and somehow carrying on. At UFC 209, Darren Elkins made a comeback that seemed impossible even by his standards by roaring back from 2 rounds in the hole to defeat Uber prospect Mirsad Bektic by 3rd round TKO. He was battered and bloody, but somehow never beaten. The first round in particular went terribly for Elkins. He was being lit up on the feet before Bektic took him down and simply punished him from the top position, busting him wide open and having him close to being finished on a couple of occasions. The second round wasn't much better, but by the third, having been unable to take Elkins out, Bektic began to tire. And so Elkins began to come back slowly, gaining some positional advantages before he threw caution to the wind. Grabbing a rear waistlock out of a scramble, Elkins landed a pair of big right hands before following with a head kick that sent Bektic crashing down. His primal roar post-fight said it all. This was a man who would never give up, no matter how bad things got, meaning a comeback was always possible.
Turn the hip in the second and third round like he did early, and that may be the fact that his hand is a little jacked up. Russow, he got caught!
Number 6. Mike Russow vs. Todd Duffee, UFC 114. In terms of visuals alone, the fight between Mike Russow and Todd Duffee was a mismatch. Both men weighed the same, 253 pounds, but Duffee was 253 pounds of solid muscle, looking like he'd been carved from granite, while Russow was a flabby guy who looked like he may have trained twice a week. And in the first 2 rounds, the visual mismatch looked like a reality. Duffee simply threw everything he had at Russow and beat him from pillar to post. How Russow was still standing after such an onslaught was anyone's guess, but it only looked like a matter of time before Duffee finished him off. And even if he couldn't, he would surely take a lopsided decision given Russow had barely done a thing. By the 3rd round though, Duffee began to slow down. There's only so many times you can hit a guy, I guess. And somehow Russow caught him cleanly with a right hand, sending him to the ground, and a strange soft hammer fist sealed the deal. It was the UFC's equivalent of Homer Simpson's famous boxing matches, a truly classic and hilarious comeback, unfortunately for Duffee.
4 remains in round 2. Fight scheduled for 3 minutes. Holy shot. Beautiful.
Number 5. Scott Smith vs. Pete Sell, The Ultimate Fighter 4 Finale. Teammates on the 4th season of The Ultimate Fighter, Scott Smith and Pete Sell were booked against each other on the undercard of the finale show and were already looking to have an instant classic fight. Both men threw caution to the wind and decided to go toe-to-toe, with Sell being knocked down by a Smith left hand in the opening round. By the second round, it was clear that someone was being knocked out, and for a moment, it looked like Smith. Sell began to get the better of the exchanges, and then caught Smith with a nasty left hook to the body. Smith doubled over in pain and stumbled backwards, but as Sell smelt blood and charged in for the finish, Hands of Steel uncorked the one punch he had left, a huge right hand. The punch caught the onrushing Sell cleanly and knocked him down, and Smith collapsed onto him to add one more right hand to seal the deal, before rolling around in agony due to the prior body shot. It was one of the greatest comebacks in UFC history, and it taught everyone a valuable lesson. Don't leave yourself open to a shot, even if it looks like your opponent is done.
Seconds left in the fight. Swinging to the finish. They go the distance.
Number 4. Frankie Edgar vs. Gray Maynard, UFC 136. In their second meeting at UFC 125, Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard went to war over the lightweight title. And if that fight had gone to Edgar, rather than it being a draw, it might have ended up on this list in its own right, as Edgar came back from a horrendous beating in the first round to take enough points on the scorecards to prevent Maynard from winning his title. A rematch was scheduled for UFC 136 a few months later, and early on, things looked just as bad for Edgar as they had in the prior fight. Maynard dropped him with a huge uppercut in the first round and then went down, landing more punches and a flying knee, dropping Edgar numerous times and busting his nose up. How Edgar survived the round was a mystery, but survive he did, and somehow he began to come back in the second and third rounds. By the fourth, it was clear that Maynard had probably emptied his tank in pursuit of the finish in the first round. Edgar was bloodied and battered, but not beaten, and managed to land a huge uppercut of his own that hurt the challenger before dropping him with a pair of right hooks. Maynard was done, and Edgar had retained his title in the most dramatic fashion possible, with a wild comeback straight out of a Rocky movie. Number 3. Cheick Kongo vs. Pat Barry, UFC on Versus 4. Despite a bunch of fights that largely involved him doing little more than clinching and landing knees to his opponent's body and groin, Cheick Kongo somehow garnered a reputation as an exciting fighter in the UFC. Most of it was probably down to this classic comeback that saw him rise up from the dead to knock out fellow striker Pat Barry in the main event of UFC on Versus 4. The fight was moved to the main event after the loss of Nate Marquardt versus Rick Story because it promised action, and boy did it deliver. Within a minute or so, Barry had Kongo on the verge of being stopped as he countered a low kick with a right hand that dropped the Frenchman. When Kongo got to his feet, Barry knocked him down a second time, and surely the fight was over. But not so. Kongo somehow wheeled himself up, sliding around like a drunkard on ice. Barry decided to go for the kill, but as he closed in, he forgot the most important thing about MMA. Always defend yourself, and walked directly into a pair of right hands that turned out his lights and sent him down, stiff as a corpse. Kongo was still so wobbly that he practically collapsed onto Barry to land a follow-up shot. It was perhaps the wildest one-round fight in UFC history, and definitely one of the best comebacks. Number 2. Matt Hughes vs. Frank Trigg, UFC 52. This was a fight that put Matt Hughes over as a true UFC superstar, and it's also UFC President Dana White's favorite of all time. Welterweight champion Hughes and challenger Trigg had engaged in a war of words prior to this fight, but when it came down to it, it looked like it would be Trigg who would come out on top. He landed a low blow to Hughes early in the fight that went unnoticed by referee Mario Yamasaki, and then dropped the champion with a follow-up combination. With Hughes on Dream Street, Trigg dropped into full mount and pounded away before taking Hughes back. A rear naked choke followed, and Hughes' face began to turn purple. But somehow the champion fought out of the hold and found himself on top. From there, he scooped Trigg up into the air and delivered a running body slam before mounting the challenger to return the favor. And when Trigg turned his back, Hughes succeeded where his opponent had failed, locking up a fight-ending rear naked choke and forcing Trigg to submit. It was an incredible comeback from one of the greatest champions in UFC history, and remains on the UFC's opening highlight reel to this day.
Sonnen! Chael's in big trouble. Chael's got his legs. He's got his legs across. That's what's. He's tapping! Wait a minute, what's going on here? Did he tap?
Number 1. Anderson Silva vs. Chael Sonnen. By the time UFC 117 came around, Anderson Silva was already widely recognized as the top pound-for-pound fighter in the UFC, and he'd already made 6 successful defenses of his middleweight title. When challenger Chael Sonnen promised to swing the hammer in a one-sided pounding, it seemed like a load of hot air. But when it came to fighting time, it turned out that Sonnen was deadly serious. He landed huge punches standing that had the Brazilian champion in a ton of trouble, and also took Silva down at will, where he simply beat the hell out of him for 4 straight rounds. Silva used some elbows to open a cut on the challenger, but going into the final round, it had been a one-sided fight, and nobody was under any illusion as to who was winning. Silva had simply never been dominated in this fashion before. With about 2 minutes remaining, it looked like Silva's title was slipping away, but somehow he managed to throw up his legs and lock up a triangle choke from the bottom. Sonnen fought, but it was too late, and he had to tap out, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory in a truly jaw-dropping moment. Due to the punishment he'd taken and the incredibly high stakes, Silva's comeback remains the greatest in UFC history. Hence, it seems intense comebacks that enthrall the fans and keep up the spirit of UFC are not rare at all, and these comebacks are just so satisfying to watch. After all, who doesn't like a massive savage comeback that shakes the leaderboard? Which one is your favorite comeback? Do tell in the comments. Hope you liked the video. Please do like, share, and subscribe. And also hit the bell icon so that you never miss your dose of entertainment. MMA Wired will be back soon with more amazing content just for you. Till then, keep growing, keep smiling.